Last night my son called me a burden. Just like that, without a tremor in his voice as he set the supermarket receipt on the table like he was tossing it in the trash. "You're a burden, Mom. You're ruining my life." That's what he said. And the worst part wasn't the line by 70, "You've heard it all." It was the face he had when he said it. The same one he wore as a boy when a toy broke and he went looking for someone to blame. I didn't answer. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I went to the sink, turned off the tap, and with the calm that belongs to things that hurt too much, I served him a coffee. "With sugar or with guilt?" I asked. He didn't get the joke. Nor did he need to. Then I went upstairs, and while unbuttoning my housecoat, I thought that sometimes sons turn so much into the men who broke us that you wonder if life isn't just a tacky loop. I slept little. Half asleep, I heard his car leave at 3 in the morning. The sound of the engine blended with the screams I didn't let out. In the morning, the phone's ring woke me. It was the landline, the one nobody uses anymore, so I answered with my heart in my mouth. But it wasn't for me. It was for him. A woman's voice, professional and polite. "May I speak with Mr. James Munoz, please? We're calling from Banco Sur." I don't know what instinct made me put it on speaker, and I heard everything. Every word. The maturity date, the mortgage, the guarantee, the expired term. My name, my signature. I didn't quite understand, but my body did. A chill climbed my back, like someone had peeled off my skin. The bank was calling him, but they were talking about me, about my house, about my debt, a debt I didn't remember taking on. He hung up all at once. He looked at me with an empty face. "Don't get nervous, Mom. It's a mistake." And he ran out into the hallway with the phone glued to his ear, yelling at someone who didn't dare answer him. I stayed, still, staring at the table where the crumpled grocery receipt still sat. It was funny, I thought. Last night I was the burden, and today the bank burdened him. If life were a series, that would be the first twist. While the water boiled for coffee, I opened the drawer where I keep just-in-case things. We all have one. Mine had everything: a tape measure, spent batteries, a lighter that doesn't work, and a tin of Danish cookies full of papers. Receipts, bank letters, and an old card in faded blue ink. Marta Serrano, attorney. Marta was my co-worker at the sewing shop. She stood up for the girls when the boss got clever with the payments. "A woman with papers is dangerous, Helen," she used to say. And she was right. I sat down to sort the documents, dates, numbers, stamps. Among them, a contract with my signature, round lettering, the kind you do when you still trust. There it was, my guarantee. I had put up my house to save my son's business, and I didn't even remember. The irony made me laugh. In the shop we always said, "You can't stitch straight with crooked thread." Well, seems life is the same. He came back 2 hours later. Face distorted, keys trembling in his hand. He tried to play it off, but the sweaty shirt betrayed him. "Mom, it's nothing. I'll fix it." With what? Promises or lies? "Don't talk to me like that. I've got enough going on." "I'm not talking like that. I'm finally talking." A silence fell, heavy as a soaked coat. Then he said something that froze me. "If the bank calls, don't talk to anyone. I'll handle it." Right then, I knew there wasn't a mistake. There was fear. And a lying son's fear is something you smell before he opens his mouth. We didn't argue more. He locked himself in his room to make calls. I stayed in the kitchen, with the clock striking 12 and the sun cut out on the wall. I thought of my husband, of the years I ironed uniforms and worked. Miracles with a railwayman's pay. If he were alive, I'd have told him the same thing I said to the air. For all the pushing, trains sure come out ungrateful. I made myself another coffee, bitter. And there, watching the steam rise, I decided something without thinking. I wasn't going to let anyone take my house without understanding how they'd done it. I didn't know where to start, but I knew with whom. I looked up Marta's number online, and though it took me half an hour with clumsy fingers, I found her. She lived 6 blocks away, retired, still an attorney, for friends who don't keep quiet. Perfect. I was ready to talk. Before I go on with my story, I'm very curious to know where in the world you're joining from today and at what time. I'd love to read you in the comments. Because sometimes, telling these things feels lighter when you imagine someone on the other side is listening, someone who understands what it is to trust and pay dearly for it. That said, back to my story. I called Marta that same afternoon. She recognized me instantly, with that voice that always seemed to laugh at drama. "Helen, it's been ages. What have you done? Killed someone or signed something without reading?" The second, it seems. Oof, worse. We met at the La Parada bar, where we used to have lunch when we still worked. I walked slowly, like measuring each step. The air smelled of toast and gasoline. On the way, I passed the bank branch. The blue sign shone clean, as if money washed sins away. I thought of going in and asking, but held back. I didn't want to go to war alone. Marta was waiting at a table in the back, glasses on the tip of her nose, and a notebook full of underlines. She hugged me tight, the way women who've saved themselves many times do. I told her everything, every detail. She didn't interrupt me once, she just took notes. When I finished, she looked at me seriously. "Helen, that's not a simple guarantee. They roped you into a commercial operation. And what does that mean? That if your son doesn't pay, you lose the house. Ah, and that they knew it. Who? Him and the bank." I didn't feel anger at first, but a kind of emptiness, like someone had blown me out from the inside. Then came heat, indignation, bitter laughter. Well, if they wanted to play with me, they picked the wrong doll. Marta raised her cup like a toast. "That's the spirit. But careful, banks don't lose without scratching. Neither do I." We left the bar with a plan. The next day we'd go together to the branch, review the original contract and, if needed, report it. Marta gave me a yellow folder. "Keep your papers here, Helen. Everything starts when a woman orders her disorder." On the way back home, I ran into Grace, my neighbor from the third floor. She stopped me in the entryway. "Something wrong? You've got that look like you just found out the 3 wise men were the bank." I laughed. "Something like that. Well, if you need witnesses, my tongue is sharp." That night I couldn't sleep, but for the first time it wasn't from sadness. It was something like hunger, excitement, the feeling of being alive. At 3 in the morning I went down to the kitchen, turned on the light and saw my reflection in the window. An older woman, yes, but with burning eyes. I poured another coffee, no sugar, with a dash of rage. And I said out loud, just to hear myself, "If I'm a burden, let me be explosive." The next morning I woke before the alarm, though I hardly used it anymore. My body had me on edge, as if it knew something important was coming. In the kitchen, the wall clock read 6:30, and the silence weighed more than the air. James was still asleep, or pretending. I made coffee, the first of the day, the one that smells like decisions. On the table lay the yellow folder Marta had given me. I looked at it the way you look at a bomb you built yourself and don't know how it will go off. At 9 sharp, I rounded the corner to Banco Sur's branch with Marta at my side. She walked like someone going into mass, serious, steady, unafraid of sin. She carried her leather bag on her arm, full of papers and patience. I, on the other hand, carried my heart in my throat and my head in seamstress mode, threading every word I was going to say. Outside, the bank's blue sign gleamed insolently in the sun. We went in. The air conditioning slapped my face like a clean smack. Inside, everything smelled of expensive perfume and new plastic. A young man in a suit asked us to wait. I recognized the tone people use with the elderly, that polite tone that sounds like condescension. "How may I help you, ma'am?" he said, with a training course smile. Marta stepped ahead. "We're here to speak with the manager, Mr. Garrido. He has an appointment with us from yesterday." The boy was thrown off a second and let us through. While we waited, I watched the desks, keyboards, screens, and thought everyone there seemed to float, that no one there knew what it is to stand in line at the butcher's with 3 counted coins. Mr. Garrido finally appeared, a man of about 50, polished gray hair, wine-colored tie. He smiled like someone who already owes you a favor. Mrs. Munoz, a pleasure. I'm glad to see you. I nodded, though I didn't remember ever seeing him. He ushered us into his office and closed the door. The silence changed temperature. You see, Doña Helen, he began, I understand your concern, but what you signed was simply a guarantee. A family trust formality, nothing more. His voice was sweet, almost hypnotic, but steel lay beneath it. Marta didn't let him continue. A trust formality, you say? Curious, because Clause 9b of the contract turns that guarantee into full liability in case of default. That's not trust, that's a trap. Garrido pretended to check the documents. Well, ma'am, Mrs. Munoz signed voluntarily. Marta laughed. Voluntarily? Yes, but with incomplete information. That's called intent to deceive. He looked at her with disdain and addressed me, skipping over Marta, as if the conversation were between adults and I were the child. Doña Helen, your son trusted you. All sons do. No one deceived you. I took a breath and answered without a tremor. Deceiving isn't always lying, Mr. Garrido. Sometimes it's not saying just enough so the other side won't understand. A tense silence fell. Marta winked at me where he couldn't see. Garrido sighed and leaned back, with that air of men who believe they have the last word. Look, we'll do what we can. But the debt exists, and there's a legal deadline. I leaned forward. And what happens if the debt was made under emotional pressure and incomplete information? What if the bank knew my son was at financial risk and used me to cover him? He smiled, a smile that never reached the eyes. You would have to prove that, ma'am. Marta smiled back. And that's what we'll do. On the way out, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else, a mix of adrenaline and old anger. Marta took my arm. I swear if I could sue every bank in the country, I'd do it for sport. I laughed. It had been months since I laughed like that, with appetite. On the corner we bought churros, because justice makes you hungry. We ate standing on the sidewalk, laughing like two girls. Life tasted like grease and sugar. Back home, James was in the living room on the phone. His voice sounded tight. When he saw me, he hung up abruptly. Where were you? He asked. At Mass, I answered. A very particular Mass where the priest hands back your sins in contract form. He looked confused. What are you talking about? I went to the bank, with Marta. He turned red, almost purple. What did you do? I told you not to get involved. And I told you not to lie to me. For a second I thought he'd yell, but he didn't. He crumpled onto the sofa and covered his face with his hands. Mom, you don't understand. I'm trying to fix it. If you talk to those people, you make it all worse for me. I stood in front of him. By those people, do you mean the bank or the women who still know how to read without their hands shaking? He looked up, tired. All of them, Mom. You can't play the hero now. I stepped closer. I'm not playing, James. I'm just learning the rules. In the afternoon, I called Claire, his ex-wife. I always liked her, though James preferred we didn't talk. I told her roughly what was happening. There was silence on the other end. I'm not surprised, she finally said. Months ago, a man named Stephen, his partner, called me. He asked if James had any property in his name. When I said no, he hung up. Be careful, Helen. Her voice sounded worried, sincere. And Luke? I asked. Fine, growing too fast. He misses you. I smiled. Tell him Grandma's fighting dragons. Then he'll want to see you. I hung up and stood a while looking out the window. Outside, the street had that 5 in the afternoon color that feels like a breath. I thought about what Garrido had said, how every word was designed to make me doubt myself. That was the real trap. Convincing you that you know nothing, that your signature doesn't count because your age made it fragile. But no, I knew how to sew, and whoever knows how to sew knows how to unpick. That night, Marta called me. I was going through the papers, she said without hello. Your son signed another document 3 months after the guarantee. I found it in the database. That operation could show he and the bank acted together. If we get proof, We can stop the foreclosure. And how do you get that? I asked. With time and noise. And we've got plenty of both. I smiled, hearing her. Count on me. I'll let you know tomorrow. We'll go meet some women in the neighborhood who were also tricked. If we band together, we'll be stronger. Perfect. I don't want to be a martyr. I want to be a nuisance. She laughed. You already are. When I hung up, I heard footsteps in the hallway. James poked his head in. Who were you talking to? Marta. Mom, I'm begging you to drop this. I'll handle it. How? Selling another lie? It's not that simple. Of course it isn't. It never is when the one who wades in the mud believes he's still clean. He said nothing. He went to his room and shut the door. The thud echoed, but I didn't move. I stayed a while longer in the kitchen, phone on the table, and my heart a little calmer. I knew the road was just beginning. Marta was right. Banks scratch, but so do I. And when women gather, banks lose their balance. Outside it started to drizzle, that rain that cleans without noise. I watched the reflection of the drops on the glass and thought about all the things you sign in life without reading. Promises, marriages, silences. But that day, I decided to read it all, even if it hurt. I poured one last coffee, with the calm of someone getting ready for war. I caught the bitter smell and thought that sometimes the taste of truth is a lot like reheated coffee. Strong, unpleasant, but impossible to quit. Tomorrow, I would go meet those women Marta spoke about. I didn't know that meeting was going to change everything, nor that between churros, clauses, and laughter, we were going to start weaving a net that would make more than one marble office tremble. But that would be the next day. That night, while the rain hammered the roof, I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt alive, needed and, above all, dangerous. The next morning, Marta was waiting for me at the corner under a mated red umbrella that looked like a flag. The rain had left the air smelling of earth and promise. We walked to the place where the other women met, a former parish hall now used for sewing classes and tea. There were thermoses, mismatched chairs, and a long table covered with a faded floral oilcloth. There they were. 5, 6, maybe 7 women of different ages, each with her story marked on her face. Some brought folders stuffed with papers, others hardback notebooks. All with the same look, that mix of anger and dignity you only see in those who are no longer afraid. Marta introduced me as if I were a newly arrived ally to the resistance. This is Helen, the guarantee case. She's bringing fresh material. I nodded, a bit embarrassed by the attention. But when I saw Grace in the back, with her thermos in one hand and a cookie in the other, something in my chest loosened. Told you, she shouted from her chair. Banks feed on absent-minded grannies. Welcome to the club. Everyone laughed. I sat among them and listened. They talked about everything. About the calls that scared them, about signatures with no explanation, about contracts impossible to understand. One, Amalia, said she lost her savings in a product she couldn't even pronounce. Another, Pilar, confessed she signed an insurance to protect her grandkids and ended up with a debt. These weren't isolated stories. They were a pattern. And what impressed me most was that, despite the damage, they still laughed. If we all cry at once, we'll flood the country, someone said, and the others toasted with coffee. Marta stood and took the floor. This isn't charity or therapy. We're going to organize. Each of you will bring your papers and we'll review them. We can't turn back time, but we can make noise. And noise scares more than lawsuits. Applause. Me too. I didn't know exactly what I was getting into, but I felt something wake up inside me. It wasn't just my house anymore. It was everyone's. At the end of the meeting, Grace grabbed my arm. Come with me. I've got something to show you. We went up the stairs to her flat. Her home smelled of camphor and fresh soup. She opened a drawer and pulled out a blue folder full of clippings. I've been saving news about people this happened to. Look at this article, from last year. Banco Sur fined for abusive practices against seniors. And this one, about a manager transferred for manipulating guarantees. Guess his name. I read slowly. Edward Garrido. I shivered. The same one who saw you yesterday, she said. It's not the first time he's done this. That night, while making dinner, I told James about the meeting. He barely looked up from his phone. Mom, you're getting into trouble. Those people will just fill your head with ideas. And what would you rather? That they fill it with debts? You don't understand. It's dangerous. Dangerous is staying quiet. He looked exhausted, or defeated, or both. He wasn't the cocky man from days ago anymore. He was a guy trapped in his own maze. I felt sorry, yes, but also angry, because every step he took to get out of the hole seemed to want to drag me back into it. That same night, while he slept, I stayed in the kitchen going through my papers with a flashlight. I was afraid to turn on the light and wake the ghosts. Among the documents, I found a handwritten note from my husband, from when he was still alive. Don't let them make a fool of you, Lenita. If you don't understand something, ask twice. I closed my eyes a moment and felt his voice as if he were there. Amazing how the dead sometimes give the best advice late. The next day, Marta called early. We've got news, she said without preamble. A neighborhood journalist wants to cover our story. Her name is Claire. I froze for a second. Claire? Claire Sanchez? Yes. Do you know her? She's my ex-daughter-in-law. Marta burst out laughing. Well, look at that. The world is small and banks are big. Better to have family on our side. I hesitated a moment, but agreed. Claire had always been one to fight with elegance. We met at the usual bar. Claire arrived with a recorder and a notebook. She greeted me with a long hug, without reproach, without blame. Helen, I'm happy to see you. Me too, dear. She had that calm tone of someone who has already seen a lot. We sat, she ordered coffee and began. I want to tell your cases without melodrama, with real names. If banks take advantage of older women, people should know. Marta smiled. We don't want fame, we want shame, someone else's. Claire wrote down every word. She looked at me for a moment. Do you mind if I use your name? No. If they're going to take my house, they should at least know whose it is. While we talked, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. A man's voice, tense, almost whispering. Mrs. Munoz, this is Stephen, your son's partner. I need to see you. It's important. I stayed silent. I can't talk on the phone, he went on. But your son hasn't told you everything. Let's meet tomorrow. Parking garage at the mall, level -2, at 6. Come alone. He hung up before I could answer. I put the phone away and took a deep breath. Claire watched me, intrigued. Everything okay? Yes, I lied. A certain Stephen. Not sure if that's good or bad. I told Marta that afternoon. Sounds like a dime store novel, she said. But novels sometimes tell more truth than notaries. Go. But not alone. I'll wait nearby. I nodded. I couldn't help thinking what else my son could have done without telling me. I felt that knot in the stomach that isn't hunger or fear. It's intuition. That night, while I washed the dishes, Grace rang the bell. She brought a cake wrapped in foil. To sweeten the bitterness, she said. She kept me company in the kitchen, chatting about nothing, but her eyes noticed everything. Your boy's nervous. You can see it on his face. He is. Then be smart. When men are cornered, they lie worse. I thanked her for the cake and the advice. After she left, I stood looking out the window. Outside, the wind moved the branches as if the world were breathing. At midnight, I heard James on the phone in his room. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew the tone. Urgency, guilt, desperation. He hit something, a chair, maybe the wall. I didn't go in. Asking no longer made sense. The truth was working its own way out, like a crack in plaster. The next morning, I put on my coat, slipped the papers into the yellow folder, and left the house. Marta was waiting on the corner, again with her red umbrella, though it wasn't raining anymore. We walked without speaking. I knew what awaited me that afternoon with Stephen would be the next thread in this strange fabric I was unwillingly weaving. And as we crossed the street, I thought life is like a badly finished seam. Pull one thread and everything comes apart. But at least now I knew it wasn't just my fear unraveling, it was the silence too. The mall parking garage smelled of damp, old rubber, and distrust. The kind of place where echoes last longer than words, and where you feel any secret hangs in the air a moment before it disappears. I arrived on time, as if I had an appointment with the truth. Marta insisted on coming, but stayed upstairs in the cafe on the second floor, watching from a distance. She texted me before I went down. "If you're not back in 20 minutes, I'm calling the fire brigade or the press, whichever gets here first." I replied, "Calm down," though I wasn't. The elevator opened on level -2, and the air changed temperature. The lights flickered, and the sounds of engines starting mixed with the squeak of shopping carts. In the distance, I saw a man leaning on a dark car. Stephen, my son's partner. His face was tense, and his coat too elegant for the place. When he saw me, he took off his glasses and greeted me with a half smile, the kind that tries to be kind but is born of exhaustion. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Munoz." His voice was lower than I expected. "I don't want to get you in trouble, but I think you're already in it." "I gathered that, son," I said, looking him in the eye. "What I want to know is how deep the mud goes." Stephen looked around, as if afraid of being watched, and motioned me closer. He spoke slowly, almost confessional, the tone men use when they finally decide to tell the truth, not because they want to, but because they have no other way out. "James is in a very ugly hole," he said. "The business hasn't been doing well for 2 years. We had to refinance, lie to the bank, pretend we had more clients than we did. And your son, well, your son used your guarantee as collateral for a personal line of credit. He didn't ask your permission because he knew you wouldn't say no, but he didn't explain what he was getting you into either." I listened in silence. Part of me wanted to scream at him. Another part just wanted to sit on the floor and laugh to keep from crying. But I stayed still, steady, hands in my pockets so he wouldn't see my fingers tremble. "And what's your role in all this, Stephen?" I asked. He shrugged. "I was an accomplice by omission. I looked the other way while he sank the ship, because it was my ship too. But when I saw he was going to take you down with him, I decided to get off. I have proof of what we did: emails, contracts, transfers. But if I hand them over, I go down too." "Then why call me?" I said, cold. "Because the bank will make a move before the end of the month. They're preparing foreclosure. And when that happens, James will lose everything. And so will you. If anyone can stop it, it's you." I stared at him a long time, trying to see whether there was compassion in his words or only desperate calculation. I didn't know. But something in his tone rang too true to ignore. "Give me that proof," I asked. Stephen handed me a small flash drive. "It's all there. Don't mention me. Don't look for me. If you use it carefully." And without giving me time to answer, he got in the car and disappeared among the garage's blinking lights. I went up to the cafe with my heart pounding in my stomach. Marta was waiting by the window with 2 coffees already cold. I told her everything in one breath. She didn't say anything for a long while. She just twirled the flash drive between her fingers, thoughtful. "This could help us," she murmured at last. "If there are irregular movements, the bank will have to negotiate. But first, we need to see what's on it." We spent the afternoon at her place, a small flat full of folders and the smell of tobacco. While her old laptop booted up at a crawl, Marta talked non-stop, as if she wanted to fill the silence. "These guys think that because you've got wrinkles, you've also got fear. They don't know fear wears out like shoes." Finally, the computer opened the files. There were emails, fake balance sheets, and a couple of documents on Banco Sur letterhead with Garrido's digital signature. We checked it all with the focus of someone inspecting a bomb about to go off. "This is gold, Helen," Marta said, a mix of excitement and anger in her voice. "If this comes to light, we don't just stop your foreclosure, we dump them in a huge mess." "And how do we bring it to light without my son ending up in jail?" I asked. She went quiet. "Justice and love have always coexisted badly. We'll see how we handle it," she said at last, lower. "For now, Let's keep it safe, but don't lose sight of it. This flash drive is worth more than your house. That night I walked home alone. The air smelled of fresh bread and gasoline, a mix of a city alive and tired. When I got home, James was waiting in the living room. His brow was furrowed and he held a drink. "Where were you?" he asked, part worried son, part stern prosecutor. "Taking a walk," I said, without blinking. "I saw you with that woman, Marta." He said her name like it made him sick, and then at the mall. "You followed me?" "I wanted to know what you were plotting." "Well, now you know." "I'm plotting my defense." He looked at me with a mix of fury and weariness. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. "If you bring those people in, you'll destroy me." I held his gaze. "No, James. You already destroyed yourself. I'm only trying to pick up the pieces that are mine." He didn't answer. He poured himself another drink and went out to the balcony. For a moment I thought of going to him, of touching his shoulder, but I didn't. There was a distance we could no longer cross. It wasn't just the money. It was something deeper, the crack between the one who gives everything and the one who gets used to receiving without gratitude. When he went to bed, I took the flash drive and hid it in an old sewing box, under the spools and loose buttons. "Buttons for when something breaks," my husband used to say. Well, there it was, a new button for an old suit, my defense. The next day Marta rang early. She had an appointment with an old acquaintance at the railway union to look for documents on my late husband. "Maybe there's something useful," she said. I didn't know what she meant, but I agreed. At that point, any lead was welcome. The Union archive was a basement full of dust and damp paper smell. An older man waited on us grudgingly, but when Marta explained why we were there, something in his look changed. "Wait here," he said. He came back after a few minutes, with a yellowed folder. Inside, a workplace accident report and an unclaimed compensation voucher in my husband's name. "This has been here over 30 years, he explained. "The money should have gone to a dormant account." I shivered. Marta glanced at me. "Do you see, Helen? If the bank never notified that account, we've got another thread to pull. They didn't just trick you with the guarantee. They also kept what was yours." We left the union without saying a word. Outside, the sun was slanting, and the dust in the air seemed to float slower. We walked in silence for a bit, until Marta said, "Let's return the favor. We know how to sew traps, too." I smiled. Not because all was well, but because, for the first time in a long time, I felt I could win something worth winning. And as I tucked the folder under my arm, I thought that life, in the end, is this: a series of crisscrossed threads, some broken, some hidden, and a few that can still be used to stitch a different ending. I went home clutching the folder like I was carrying a borrowed heart. On the bus, engine noise mixed with my thoughts. I looked out the window, and the world seemed to move at a different speed. People walking with bags, children leaving school, everything in place but me, who felt like I was carrying a bomb wrapped in yellow papers. When I got off, the sky had that gray tone that announces a storm, and the air smelled of something old, as if the whole neighborhood knew something was about to blow. Marta had asked me not to say anything yet, to wait and cross-check the documents and dates. But I, stubborn as always, couldn't help it. James was in the kitchen, looking at his phone, and without thinking I put the folder on the table. "This was at the union," I said. He looked up, annoyed. "And what's that now?" "Your father's compensation, James. The money that never arrived, that the bank kept and kept quiet about." He went silent, looked at me like he didn't understand, then laughed briefly, nervously. "Mom, that must have expired 1,000 years ago. Laws expire, not shame." He didn't answer. He stood up, paced the kitchen, and finally said, "Don't get involved anymore, Mom. Let me handle it." The line amused me so much, I nearly choked. Handle it? How? By signing another paper? By lying better? Enough, James. This time, I'm going to handle it. I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Fear, not of the banks or ruin, but of me, of the mother who suddenly refused to be ordered around. We didn't eat together that night. He shut himself in his room and stayed there, on the phone until late. I used the time to open the living room drawers, looking for the old bank statements. I found them, folded inside an envelope, and among them, a sheet with my forged signature. The handwriting was similar, but not mine. I stared a long time without crying. It was like looking at a portrait painted by someone who hates you. You recognize the face, but not the soul. I called Marta the next morning. I knew it, she said as soon as I told her. That signature isn't yours. We've got more than I imagined. She had me meet at her place to review everything. There, among piles of papers and cups of coffee, we discovered the account where my husband's compensation should have gone was still active, hidden under another number. They absorbed it when consolidating old accounts, Marta said, marking dates with a pen. That's illegal if they didn't notify you. If we claim it, not only can they give you the money back, we can also report the omission. I felt a strange vertigo, a mix of anger and hope. And how much would that be? I asked. Marta made a quick calculation. With interest, plenty. Not enough to make you rich, but enough to balance the scales. I stared at the ceiling, imagining the auctioneer's hammer frozen in the air just before striking. That I can get my house back, I whispered. With that, you can get yourself back, Marta corrected. Back in the neighborhood, I ran into Claire. She had a notebook under her arm and a nervous smile. I just interviewed Grace, she said. Your neighbor's a whirlwind. She told me about the group and how you're organizing. And what do you think? I think there's a huge story here, Helen. But I need your testimony. Can we record tomorrow? I hesitated. If this hits the papers, the bank will come for me. They're coming anyway, she replied calmly. The difference is you won't be alone now. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the building's footsteps, the elevator, a neighbor's distant snoring. I thought of my husband, what he'd have done with all this. He always said bankmen didn't know what it is to earn a bill with your hands stained. And there I was, 30 years later, fighting the same men, only better perfumed. In the morning, when James left without saying goodbye, I sighed with relief. I used his absence to call Claire and confirm the interview. She arrived with her recorder, on time, with Luke. The boy hugged me without a word. He was taller, with that look between boy and man that tightens your heart. Grandma, they say you got yourself into trouble, he said, smiling. Yes, but the good kind. Claire set the recorder on the table and asked me to speak without thinking, like telling an after-dinner anecdote. I did. I told everything, from James's insult to the bank visit, the flash drive, and the hidden compensation. I left nothing out, not even the fear. When I finished, Claire turned it off and looked at me with wet eyes. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Luke came over and kissed my cheek. You're the best, Grandma. No, sweetheart. I'm the most stubborn. We laughed, and for a moment I felt something like happiness, as if all that mess served at least to bring us a little closer. In the afternoon, Grace organized another group meeting. This time the hall was full. New women came, drawn by the rumor that a grandma had stood up to the bank. Marta presented the case clearly, without names. She explained how dormant accounts become bank loot and how incomplete information is used as a trap. There were applauses, indignation, held back tears. Then one woman proposed creating a small, common fund to help those at risk of losing their homes. A red button, Grace said. When one of us presses it, the rest show up. I thought it was brilliant. In minutes, we were organizing shifts, contributions, contacts. Solidarity stitched itself so fast, you could almost hear the sound of invisible needles. Marta pulled me aside at the end. Helen, I have to show you something, she said, pulling out a printed page. It was an email from Garrido, the bank manager, dated a few days ago. It mentioned the urgent execution of the guaranteed property and ordered accelerating the procedure due to risk of debtor flight. That means they want to get ahead. Take your house before you have time to move. I looked at the paper with a calm I didn't even understand. Let them try. I'm not hiding anymore. When I got back to the building, James was waiting at the door. His face was different. Dark circles, messy hair, broken look. "We need to talk," he said. "We already are," I answered. We went up. "I know about the interview with Claire. I saw it on my phone. You're making everyone talk about us. What do you want? The truth to be known? At the cost of destroying me? At the cost of saving me?" There was a long silence. Then I saw him break inside. He sat and murmured, almost voiceless. "I didn't want this, Mom. I just wanted everything to stay the same. There's the problem, James. The same doesn't work anymore. I left him there, eyes on the floor, and went to my room. I closed the door, took a deep breath, and looked at the folder on the bed. In those papers slept my husband's money, the proof of his effort, the thread that could hold me up. And also sleeping there, unbeknownst to it, was the beginning of my freedom. As I turned out the light, I thought there are battles that begin in silence, with the simple act of not giving up. And that night, under a roof that was still mine, I knew mine had just truly begun. The next days were a whirlwind of calls, meetings, and sleepless nights. Claire's story in her local outlet spread more than we imagined. "The seamstress who faced her bank," the headline read, and although the text was respectful, what came next wasn't as much. The phone rang off the hook. Curious journalists, neighbors asking if it was true, even strangers congratulating me or asking for advice. Marta said it was good, that exposure would force the bank to move carefully, but I was beginning to feel the weight of being a symbol I hadn't asked to be. Grace, on the other hand, was thrilled. "At last we make the news without dying first," she said every time someone greeted her at the bakery. The group was growing. More women arrived with folders, others with crumpled receipts or forgotten passbooks. Marta organized them with a sergeant's precision. Every afternoon we met to review strategies: who should book an appointment, what we should say, how to respond to pressure. We called them rehearsals, and we laughed, picturing ourselves as actors in an improvised theater. I always carried my yellow folder, the hidden flash drive, and the constant feeling that something big was about to blow. Helen, the one with the banks, they called me in the street now. It was odd. I didn't know whether to feel proud or ashamed. But one thing was certain. I no longer walked with my head down. They looked at me, and I looked back. I was no longer invisible. One afternoon, while we were reviewing documents in Marta's living room, an unexpected message arrived. It was from Claire. "They're looking for you. The bank wants to meet you, with the manager, tomorrow." We went quiet. Marta lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly, as if she needed time to process. "That means they feel the fire on their heels," she said. "Don't accept alone. I'm coming with you." The next morning, we showed up at the branch. Garrido was waiting in his office, immaculate, in a new suit, and that manual smile men get who are used to faking empathy. "Doña Helen, Miss Serrano," he said, holding out his hands. We didn't shake them. "I've read the press piece. It's a shame you didn't consult us first." "I did consult," I said, "but you never answered." He offered coffee. We declined. Marta laid on the table a copy of the union compensation and the statements with my forged signature. These documents show the bank retained money that wasn't theirs and allowed the use of Mrs. Muñoz's guarantee without due information. Garrido flipped through the papers without changing expression, though his fingers tightened for a second. "Ma'am, there are procedures. All this requires legal review. You can't come here to make a scene." "I didn't come to make anything," I replied. "I came to unmake what you built." For the first time, his smile vanished. He looked at me with that mix of contempt and calculation you learn to recognize after many humiliations. "If you continue with this attitude, the bank will act within the law." "And so will I," I answered. I stood, gathered my papers, and turned to the door. "Oh, and by the way, I've got copies of all this stored in several places, in case something gets misplaced." On the way out, Marta squeezed my arm. "You did perfectly. Now they'll try to intimidate you. Let them try." And try they did. That same night I got an anonymous call, a cold mail. Voice said, "Watch what you're doing, ma'am. You wouldn't want your son to end up worse than he is." I hung up without answering. My legs shook, but not from fear, from anger. I called Marta. They've started, I said. It was only a matter of time, she replied. Don't worry, you're not alone. The next day, we organized a bigger meeting of the spinners. There were nearly 20 women, some with children, others with granddaughters, all with the same gleam in their eyes. Grace brought cakes, and Marta printed a little manual titled Basic Guide to Not Getting Scammed with a Smile. We laughed, but the room crackled with energy. They want to scare us because we're working, Marta said. That's a good sign. During that meeting, I suggested something. If they have lawyers, we'll have allies. Claire can help us connect with other associations, the press, whoever. The more eyes, the fewer tricks. Everyone agreed. Luke, who had come with his mother, recorded part of the talk. This should be online, Grandma, he said, so others know how to defend themselves. I ruffled his hair and smiled. Do it, but no names. I didn't know that recording would spread faster than any article. That night, a clip went viral where I said, "They took us for weak, but forgot that patience is also a form of strength." The phrase ran through social media, and within hours, it filled with comments from people telling similar stories. At first, it scared me, then it made me proud. I hadn't meant to become a banner, but the seam was done. 2 days later, when the noise was starting to fade, James showed up calmer, almost resigned. "I've seen the video," he said. "You've become famous." "It's not fame, son. It's self-defense." He sat in front of me and sighed. "I asked you to trust me, and look at you now, at war with half the world. I trust you, but I also trust myself, for the first time." His face changed. "Do you know what they say about me at the bank? That I'm the one who manipulated you, that I'm a scammer. Weren't you?" "Yes, but not the way you think." He fell silent a moment, as if searching for words he couldn't find. "Stephen had debts with dangerous people. He asked me for help, and I ended up indebted to the bank. I thought I'd fix it fast, but it all got out of hand. I didn't want to drag you, Mom. I just wanted to save myself." I listened in silence. For the first time, he sounded human. I didn't excuse him, but I understood the fear behind his arrogance. "Sooner or later, we all sign something we don't understand," I told him. "You signed out of desperation, I out of trust. We both lost." We stayed quiet, sharing a silence more honest than any forgiveness. The next morning, over coffee, I got a certified letter from the bank. It was an official notice. The house auction was being moved up. It had a date and time. Marta came as soon as I called. "This is a blatant trap," she said. "They're going to try to take the flat before this gets messier." "Can we stop it?" "We can try, but we'll have to move fast. And this time, not just us." That same afternoon, Claire published another piece titled "The Bank That Doesn't Want to Listen." In it, she mentioned the auction being moved up and quoted Marta saying justice would take time to react. Social media lit up again. The women in the group offered to come with me on the hearing day. "They won't beat you, Helen," Grace told me. "If they touch you, we all roar." I spent that night awake. The yellow folder open on the table, the flash drive to one side, the compensation papers to the other. I thought about all that had changed in so little time. I'd gone from being an invisible old woman to a woman the bank wanted to silence. And though my body and soul ached, something inside me shone, a kind of certainty I didn't know, that I was on the right side, even if it was the hardest one. At 3 a.m, I stepped onto the balcony. The street was empty, only the far-off hum of the sleepless city. I looked up, at a starless sky, and thought that if my husband were watching, he might be laughing, with that look of disbelief he had when I got stubborn. "Look, old man," I murmured. The seamstress who wouldn't shut up learned to shout at last. Inside, the clock read 3:15, only days left until the auction. I didn't know how or with what strength, but I was determined to see it through. Not for the house, not for the money. For me. Because after a lifetime of signing what others put in front of me, this time the signature would be mine, written with anger, with pride, and with the steady pulse of someone who won't be erased anymore. That week the air in the building grew thick, as if the walls knew something was coming apart. I slept little, And when I did, I dreamed of papers multiplying on the table, sheets falling from the ceiling with my signature repeated, and faceless voices telling me it had all been a mistake. But when I woke, I felt clearer than ever. The auction date was marked in red on the calendar, and each day that passed was one less thread in my patience's weave. Marta came by daily, lugging her leather bag and her tiredness, and every time she opened the door she'd find me seated with documents spread out, reading them over and over, as if rereading could conjure a spell to stop time. One rainy night, when I was dozing on the sofa, someone knocked. It was almost 11. I thought of not opening, but something told me to. It was James. His face was sunken, hands shaking, voice hoarse, like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said, soaked. I offered a towel and coffee, though I already sensed coffee wouldn't fix what he had in his throat. He sat at the table, looked at the papers, and pushed them aside with a hand without looking. "They're going to come for me," he blurted. I didn't know if he meant the bank, creditors, or his own ghosts. I listened without interrupting while he unraveled into confessions. He said Stephen had disappeared, that some payments never came, that there were people pressing for money that didn't exist. "I thought I could fix it, Mom. I thought if I got one more loan I could plug the holes, pay you back, and move on. But this can't be fixed." I watched him, feeling a mix of pity and fury. "And why come now?" I asked. "Because I want you to forgive me before it's too late." I didn't know what to say. I'd spent so long waiting for an apology that when it arrived, I didn't know whether to embrace it or reject it. He shook. "The bank called me," he said. "They told me if I sign a new agreement, they can postpone the auction, but I need you to sign too. It's just a document to guarantee negotiations." I stared at him, unblinking. A document? Another signature? Another lie? "No, Mom, this time it's different." "Different was the first time, James. The rest is the same, just in different ink." He stood, desperate. "You don't understand. If we don't sign, we'll be left with nothing." "I already know what it is to be left with nothing," I replied calmly. "And it's not as scary as you think." Silence grew heavy. Outside, rain beat the glass. I saw him pull a crumpled paper from his pocket, a printed contract, and shove it toward me. "I just need your signature, please." I took it without opening it. "Tell me the truth, James. What happens if I sign?" He lowered his eyes. "I don't know." "Then there's no deal." He covered his face with his hands and broke down crying. It was the first time in many years I'd seen him like that, undone, unmasked, not an adult, a big child lost in his own clumsiness. I approached slowly, put a hand on his shoulder and said, "If you want me to forgive you, start by not asking me to sign your ruin." He stayed like that a while, silent. Then, barely a whisper, "I'll do what you ask. But don't leave me alone." I asked one thing in return. "Do something for me. Record yourself explaining everything. What you did, what you signed, how the bank pressured you. Say it in your words. Not for them, for me." At first he refused, then nodded. I took my phone, set it on the table, and hit record. "Speak," I said. He stammered at first, but little by little he began to let it out. He spoke about meetings with Garrido, the emails Stephen had him send, the bank's promises, the fear of losing the business. Each word came out like a brick pulled from his chest. When he finished, I stopped the recording and saved the file. "Thank you," I told him. "This is the most honest thing you've done in years." We sat in silence a while. Then, without looking at me, he asked to stay the night. I agreed. I slept little, ear trained on his movements in the hallway, like when he was little and I feared he'd get sick. In the morning, when I went to the kitchen, he was gone. On the table, he'd left a handwritten note. "I'm sorry, Mom. If I can fix anything, I will." I went out to look for him, but didn't find him. I called Marta. "Gone again," I said. "Don't worry, he does that by habit," she replied. But her tone had a shade that wasn't mockery. It was concern. That afternoon, Claire came with Luke. She brought the recording her son had uploaded without knowing it, a clip of James's confession. Someone had shared it, and it was spreading fast. "I'm sorry, Helen," Claire said. "We didn't know it was private." "It doesn't matter," I said, though a deep cold ran through me. In the video, James looked fragile, sincere, human. For the first time, the world could see the whole mess. That night, the bell rang. I opened the door to a bank man, suited, with an envelope. "Urgent delivery," he said. I opened it after closing the door. It was a letter signed by Garrido. "The bank regrets the media exposure of the case and will seek legal measures for defamation and disclosure of confidential material." I laughed alone, a dry sound that echoed through the house. "They'll sue me for telling the truth," I muttered. Marta arrived minutes later, newspaper under her arm. On the front page, my photo. Helen Munoz, the woman who made Banco Sur tremble. I sat down, exhausted. "This isn't mine anymore, Marta. It's a war that slipped from our hands." She lit a cigarette. "Maybe. But wars aren't always chosen. Sometimes they just arrive." We decided the next step would be to face them in person. We had the recording, the union documents, and proof of the forged signature. Enough to negotiate or sink them. But before going, I wanted to set something up. I took the flash drive, the recording, and the copies, and put them in a metal box with a note that read, "If anything happens to me, give this to the press." I left it at Grace's place without explanations. "Just in case," I said. She didn't ask, just nodded with the wisdom of old women who've seen the world burn more than once. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, listening to the far-off sound of cars and the building's murmur. In one flat, someone laughed. In another, they cried. And in the middle of it all, I breathed, feeling for the first time that although fear was still there, it no longer ruled. I had crossed a point of no return. The next day, I'd face the bank with everything, with my papers, with my wrinkles, with my truths. At 3 a.m. Someone buzzed the intercom once, without speaking. I got up, looked out the window, but the street was empty. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe a warning. I locked the door well, leaned my back against the wall, and murmured to myself, "There's no turning back now." And as the silence stretched, I realized that certainty, the one of not being able to go back, wasn't scary. It was power. It dawned with a white sun, the kind that seems to light you up to accuse you. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours, but my body moved as if it had rested a lifetime. Marta picked me up early. Her face was set, lips painted with that precision of a woman who knows she's going into battle. We rode the tram together, in silence. Outside, the city kept its indifferent rhythm, but every stop sounded to me like a ticking bomb. In my bag, I carried the documents, the flash drive, the compensation copy, and a letter in my own hand, in case I didn't come back as calm as I left. The bank building rose like a glass and marble guffaw, all reflections and revolving doors. Inside, the smell of air conditioning and expensive perfume always reminded me of a hospital, a blend of cleanliness and lies. They led us to a large room where Garrido waited standing, with that smile I already knew by heart, the smile of men who mistake control for elegance. "Mrs. Munoz, Miss Serrano, so nice to see you again. I'm sorry the circumstances are so tense." "You made the circumstances," Marta said before sitting. "Don't apologize for your own work." I remained standing. I placed the papers on the table slowly, like someone setting a piece on a board knowing the other has no move left. "Here's everything," I said. "The dormant account, the forged signature, proof that you knew. And here," I raised the flash drive, "are the emails from your office, the very ones your employee Stephen sent in my son's name." Garrido's smile tightened by a millimeter. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will when you read it in the papers," Marta cut in. He took a deep breath, sat with a studied gesture, and laced his fingers on the table. "We can resolve this civilly, without unnecessary harm. A practical solution." "Civil is not robbing old people," I said. "Practical would be returning what you took." The air grew tense. It was so heavy you could hear the lights hum. Garrido took a paper and slid it toward me. "We can offer you compensation." In exchange, of course, for withdrawing your accusations and signing a confidentiality agreement. Marta let out a short, humorless laugh. Do you really think we're here for money? What you're offering is already ours. We're just reclaiming what should never have been missing. I looked at him and added, I don't want your silence or your money. I want my house, and I want my name clean. He stood slowly, feigning patience. Doña Helen, you have no idea the harm you can do yourself. Banks don't lose. That's what my son said, and look how he ended up. His eyes flashed, just a second of wounded pride. Your son, a problematic man, isn't he? Perhaps we should review his statement. There are suspicious movements. If you keep going, you could drag him down with you. Marta slapped her palm on the table. Don't you dare. Relax, Marta, I said. If they want to use my son, go ahead. They already used him before. There was a silence that felt eternal. Garrido turned to the window, pretending to watch traffic. I propose this. Give us a week to review these documents. I guarantee we'll find a discreet way out. One more week is one less house, I replied. The auction is tomorrow. He turned, feigning surprise. Tomorrow? That's a decision from another office. Yours. We measured each other a moment, like two tired animals that still have fangs. Finally, I gathered my papers and the flash drive. Next time we speak, it'll be before a judge. And we left. On the street, the traffic sounded more real than ever. Marta walked fast, jaw clenched. They won't yield. If we don't stop it today, tomorrow the flat will be history. Then we'll go tomorrow, I said. To the auction. To what? To watch them take it? No. To see who dares keep it. We barely spoke that night. Marta stayed at my place. She wouldn't leave me alone. Grace came up with a pot of stew and a strange mood, a mix of fear and pride. If this were a movie, tomorrow we'd win, she said. But since it's real life, put on comfortable shoes. We laughed, the three of us, more from nerves than humor. James didn't show. Just a message, brief as always. Forgive me. Do what you have to do. I didn't know if it was surrender or goodbye. I stared a while at his handwriting on the screen, trying to remember when the bond between us broke and whether that break could be mended with anything more than words, but there was no time to think. I slept in my clothes, the folder at my side. I dreamed of my husband, his grease-stained hands fastening the last button on his shirt before a shift. In the dream, he said, "If they take your roof, keep the floor. That's where you start." Morning came, and the day smelled of dust and electricity. The auction building was 3 blocks from the bank. When we arrived, people were already waiting. Buyers, employees, onlookers. The echo of footsteps in the corridor sounded like judgment. At the entrance, I saw Claire with her recorder and Luke with a borrowed camera. "I'll just film the atmosphere, Grandma, I promise," he said. I didn't have the strength to argue. The auction room was cold, with yellow light that made everything look older. The man with the gavel reviewed lot names with the indifference of someone selling used watches. When he mentioned my address, my heart climbed into my throat. Marta squeezed my hand. Breathe. The first buyer raised his paddle without hesitation. An anonymous-faced investor, the kind who buys houses like stamp collections. Another followed. The figures moved like knives. Then I saw Stephen, at the back, with a man I didn't know. He hadn't disappeared. He was there, bidding, with dirty money and a new suit. I felt the urge to shout, but held back. I watched him raise his paddle again, calm, convinced the story was already written. I waited for the right moment. When the agent announced the final figure and asked if anyone would offer more, I raised mine. The murmur was immediate. Marta looked at me with a blend of disbelief and terror. "What are you doing?" "Buying my house," I said without looking at her. The auctioneer repeated the figure, and before Stephen could react, I added 20,000 more. Silence fell absolute. Stephen stood, began to protest, but the agent silenced him with a gesture. Someone whispered in his ear. The man hesitated and finally lowered his paddle. No one else bid. The gavel fell with a dry blow that boomed in my chest. For a few seconds, no one moved. Marta hugged me and whispered, "You did it." Claire filmed, and Luke cried without fully understanding why. Stephen came toward us, furious, but two staffers stopped him. "With what money?" he shouted. "With the money you hid for 30 years, I answered. There was no reply. We stepped into the open air, and the sun blinded us. I took a deep breath. It wasn't triumph. It was something deeper, simpler, the relief of closing a circle. Marta lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. "Now yes, seamstress, you stitched their mouths shut." As we walked back, Claire caught up. "What will you do now?" I looked at her, tired but alive. "Go home. To mine. And if I can, put a new sign on the door." I didn't know there were still twists to come, that the bank wouldn't give up so easily, or that what began as a domestic fight would turn into a silent revolution. But at that moment, with the city's noise sliding behind me and the gavel still ringing in my ears, I knew I wasn't the same anymore. I had entered that place an old woman, afraid of losing everything, and came out someone who, even if I lost it, wouldn't let herself be erased ever again. The afternoon after the auction was fog in my head, an endless echo between relief and suspicion. I walked back to the building without noticing my steps, folder pressed to my chest, still feeling the weight of the gavel that had closed the sale like a shot still reverberating. The streets seemed cleaner, or maybe I was the one walking differently, with that odd calm that comes after you survive what was going to devour you. Marta walked beside me, exhausted, and offered me a cigarette we didn't light. "This doesn't end here, Helen," she said without looking at me. "I know," I answered, and chuckled softly. "But for now, we won the round." When we got to the building, Grace was waiting in the doorway, floral robe and loose curls. She hugged me without asking anything, just repeating, I knew it, old ladies don't give up." We went up together, and when I opened my door, I found something I wasn't expecting. On the dining table, a cardboard box with the Banco Sur logo. Inside, a letter signed by Garrido, printed on thick paper, and a sealed envelope. My hand shook opening it. It was a legal notice, cold and perfectly written, informing that the purchase would be reviewed for possible irregularities in the transfer of funds and that the payment was under judicial observation until its origin is verified. In other words, my victory was a mirage, and the bank was already pulling strings to take back what I'd just recovered. Marta read the document in silence, brow furrowed. "I knew they wouldn't sit still," she murmured. "They'll try to void the purchase." Grace lit a cigarette in anger. "They can't do that. The house is yours now." "Of course they can," Marta said. "And they will. Not because they're right, but because they can pay for time in court." I sat slowly, feeling again that blend of exhaustion and fury that had become a second skin. I won't let them take it again. If they want war, they'll have it. That night, Claire came with Luke. She brought a laptop and a recorder and told me the auction news had spread like wildfire. "People want to know how you did it, Helen. There are hundreds of comments, messages of support, women asking for advice." "Tell them to learn to read the fine print," I answered with a bitter smile. But Claire pressed on. "This goes beyond you. There are stirrings in other neighborhoods. Groups of retirees claiming dormant accounts, neighbors organizing. You started something." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't meant to start anything, just survive. But I understood that sometimes self-defense turns into a flag. As we spoke, the bell rang again. It was James. I hadn't heard from him in days, and when I saw him, I knew something had changed. His look was calm, without arrogance, with that dim shine of someone who has hit bottom and begun to look up. He came in slowly, greeted Claire and Luke with a nod, and stood before me. "I saw the full video," he said. "All of it. What you recorded that night." A knot tightened in my stomach. "And I don't know whether it hurts more what I did or what I made you think you weren't seeing." He stepped closer. "I want to help." Marta eyed him sideways, skeptical. "And what can you do, James?" He took a breath. "I have copies of Stephen's emails. I kept them out of fear, but now they can help. If we hand them over, We can prove Garrido and the bank knew about the fraud. I looked at him, trying to recognize the son I raised in that tired man. And why now? Because I don't want my son to think his father was a coward. I agreed without words. That night, the three of us worked, reviewing documents, sorting dates, names, transfers. Marta took notes feverishly, Claire recorded statements, and Luke brought us coffee like we were preparing a household revolution. Sometimes I forgot my fatigue. There was a new energy in the air, a feeling of weaving something bigger than us. The next morning, we took everything to the group's lawyer, a small woman with a firm voice named Rosario. She reviewed the documents with surgical precision. "This is enough to open an investigation," she said. "And if we leak it to the press, the bank won't be able to touch anything without being exposed." "Leak it?" I asked. "Yes. If you make it public, you protect yourselves. No one wants to be the villain in a media scandal." Marta nodded. "We've been discreet long enough." That very afternoon, Claire published the full story, with copies of the documents and clips from James's video. Within hours, the news went viral. TV channels began to call. Radio stations asked for interviews. And for the first time, the bank went silent. No threats, no letters, no calls, just silence. And that silence, coming from them, was the clearest sign something had cracked. 2 days passed before Garrido resurfaced. He called mid-morning. "Doña Helen, please come to the bank. We can resolve this favorably. It's a misunderstanding." "I don't have misunderstandings. I have proof," I said. "And I won't set foot in your office without my lawyers. There's no need to go that far. We're already there." I hung up and stared out the window. The sky was overcast, but not threatening rain. A clean gray, the kind that announces a truce. Marta looked at me and said, "You did it, Helen. You've got them against the wall." "I don't have them, Marta. I'm just looking them in the eye." That afternoon, I sat on the balcony with a new notebook and started to write. Not a complaint, nor a summary, but an account. I wanted a record of what had happened, in case someone ever needed it. I wrote about my son's insult, the shame, the fear, the signatures, the papers, the sleepless nights, the anger, the laughter, and the small satisfaction of watching masks fall. My hands trembled, but I knew each word was another brick in rebuilding my dignity. Night fell, and the building smelled of soup and daily life. Grace stopped by and left an envelope. "They put this in the mailbox," she said. Inside was a letter with the bank's letterhead, an out-of-court settlement offer. Debt canceled, compensation account restored, and an additional payment for damages in exchange for dropping all legal action. "They want to buy your silence," Marta said. "They won't get it." "I don't want it for me," I answered, "but it could help the others." I spent the night thinking. The next morning I called a meeting at the neighborhood hall. Everyone was there. Grace, Amalia, Pilar, and several new faces. I showed them the letter. "This isn't my victory. It's an opportunity. If we accept under certain conditions, we can secure a fund for those still fighting. Let the bank pay for every silence it bought." A long silence, then steady applause. "Then we'll make history, seamstress," Grace said. That night, as I signed the agreement, this time reading and understanding every word, I thought of all that had changed. It wasn't just a house I'd reclaimed, it was the feeling of belonging to myself. I was no longer an old woman signing papers without looking. I was a woman who knew what her name was worth. When I stepped outside, the air smelled different, a mix of smoke and flowers. Marta waited on the corner. "And now what?" she asked. "Now the hard part," I said. "Keeping standing what took so much to stitch." We stood there a while, watching the city carry on, oblivious to the small earthquake we'd triggered. I knew the ending wasn't written yet, but also that nothing could take me back to where I started. Because once you see the world without fear, even if everything shakes again, you don't shake the same. The last month was a slow vertigo, a calm with a strong heartbeat underneath. The bank kept every point of the agreement, not out of generosity, but sheer survival. The news multiplied, and Claire said my story had become a reference. radio shows, reports, debates about financial abuse of the elderly. They invited me to speak, but I accepted only one interview, the one we did at the neighborhood hall, surrounded by the women who began with me. I didn't want to be the protagonist of anything, just the voice that proved you can start over even after they call you a burden. The house smelled like home again, though in a different way. Marta came less often. She could finally rest. Grace stopped by daily with absurd excuses, brought bread, leaving you a magazine, but I knew she just wanted to make sure I wasn't deflating. Sometimes, when she left, she'd slip me a little note. The spinners don't rest. And no, we didn't, though now it wasn't from fear but momentum. We kept meeting, helping others, reading contracts, teaching people to ask before signing. Half the neighborhood passed through that hall like a confessional you exit ready for battle. James took weeks to come around again. He called one afternoon, calm voice. "Can I come see you?" "If you come without papers, yes," I said. He arrived with a bouquet of daisies, the same he'd bring me as a boy when he wanted to apologize. He sat across from me, looked around at the house, the pictures, the wall clock. "I can't erase what I did, Mom," he said. "No need," I replied. "Just try not to repeat it." He told me he was working with Claire, helping review documents for other people. "I want to understand everything I signed wrong in life," he said, smiling. I laughed. "That'll take you years." "I've got time." It was the first time I felt him at peace, not perfect, but human, as if he finally understood that mistakes aren't to be hidden. They're paid for, faced, and you keep living. One random afternoon, I got an invitation from a firm in Madrid. They wanted to use my case as an example in a seminar on older consumers' rights. Marta nearly choked laughing when I told her. From housewife to landmark legal case. "You're in the books now, Helen." Then draw me with wrinkles, I earned them. I went. I spoke to lawyers, officials, and journalists. I didn't read speeches, just told my story, as always, with a steady voice and a heart full of truth. When I finished, there was a long silence, the kind before honest applause. And I thought how absurd it all was, that what began as a domestic humiliation ended as a public plea. Back in the neighborhood, life kept its rhythm. Days looked alike, but they no longer weighed on me. I cooked without hurry, opened the windows, watered plants I thought were dead, and, once in a while, indulged a small luxury, a guiltless nap. The bank letters kept coming, but now I opened them with a smile. Nothing to fear, no threat strong enough to break me. Claire dropped by sometimes with Luke, and over coffee she said they wanted to make a documentary. "The story isn't just yours, Helen. It belongs to many." "Then do it, but tell everything, even the ugly parts." "That's what people care about most," she said, laughing. Luke liked filming me talking off the cuff, as if the camera were just another neighbor. One afternoon, while he did, I told him, "People think the hardest part was facing the bank. No. The hardest part was looking in the mirror without believing I deserved it." Claire stopped the recorder and hugged me. "I'm putting that at the end." Little by little, the network of women grew beyond the neighborhood. People from other cities called, asked for advice, and we even opened a page where we shared information. We named it The Spinners, because that's what we did in the end. Join loose threads, stitch wounds, weave strength among hands that had always worked for others. Marta said if we'd started earlier, the country would have fewer scammers and more dangerous old ladies. One afternoon, leaving the hall, I found her on the corner, looking at the sky with a lit cigarette. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "That when we started this, I thought you just wanted to save your house, and in the end, you saved half the neighborhood." I answered, dryly. "It wasn't that heroic. It was necessity." "Necessity is political too," she said, and I got it. In time, Garrido resigned. I saw it on the news. A short note in a financial paper. Banco Sur restructures leadership after internal controversies. I felt no triumph, only relief. No one mentioned him again, as if his name had been erased from the map. James began visiting often again. Sometimes we ate in silence, and that silence was no longer tense, it was rest. One day he said, "I saw you on TV, Mom. I've never been so proud of you." "That doesn't say much about your past prides," I shot back, and we laughed. Between laugh and laugh, the past slowly untied itself. Winter arrived without noise. The neighborhood smelled of chestnuts and rain, and every afternoon the sky turned the color of old clothes. I kept my routines: coffee, the radio, the women's group, the messages that didn't stop. One day, while folding a tablecloth, I realized something simple and immense. I wasn't afraid of the future. I'd had it looming over me for so long, threatening, that I knew it by heart now. Fear was old, and I was older than it. That night I sat by the window, the house quiet. Outside, the neighborhood lights twinkled like breathing. I thought of my husband, the factory, the trains, all the times I kept quiet not to bother. I thought of my son, the women in the group, the first day I went to the bank scared and left angry. I thought about what it cost to get here. And I laughed softly, with that laugh that loosens a knot in your soul. The clock struck 11. I closed my eyes a moment and remembered what I said that night in front of the mirror. "If I'm a burden, let me be explosive." I smiled. I had been. Not to destroy, but to light up what no one wanted to look at. And before turning off the light, I thought without sadness, without anger, only with a peace that smelled of coffee and old paper, that sometimes justice doesn't arrive in robes or verdicts, but in something much simpler. Being able to sleep without fearing a knock at your door. Because when a woman learns to defend her name, even if they take everything else, she's already won. And well, that's where my story ends. If you stayed to the end, thank you truly. Not everyone dares to listen to what we often prefer to keep quiet. I'm just a woman who learned, maybe a little late, that once you open your mouth, there's no bank or fear that can shut you up. And now I'm curious, has anything similar happened to you? Have you had to fight for what was yours while no one believed you? Tell me below. I want to read you, yes, you. And if you liked my story, subscribe, because I still have a lot to tell. Because, believe me, once a woman dares to speak, there's no one who can make her hush.